Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Clinical Culture and Diversity series. This is the September presentation, They Changed My Name by José Faus, and we're very excited to present this in conjunction with the Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. We are offering continuing education credit for this event. Just as a reminder, if you would like that credit, you need to sign into Zoom with your full first and last name so we can make sure you get the credit. Some disclosures regarding continuing ed. The attendance, the activity code that you would need to log in with. I did share that in the chat as well. And I will also be emailing this out after the presentation. So we do have this as a quarterly event. Our next dates are November 16th, February 15th, and April 9th. They are all at noon. And the Clinical Culture and Diversity series explores issues related to intercultural communication in the clinical setting, and developing cross-cultural competencies improves patient care, provides individuals with a comprehensive educational experience, and helps KUMC become a more diverse and integrated campus. This series began in 2014 with the Office of International Programs and the School of Medicine's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and has grown into the series it is today with the partnership between those two offices and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Cabinet. All right. A little bit about our presenter. José Faus is a native of Bogotá, Colombia, and a longtime Kansas City resident. He is a visual artist, performer, writer, and teacher. He received degrees in studio art, painting, and creative writing journalism from the University of Missouri at Kansas City. He has been involved in a series of mural projects locally and internationally, and participated in a variety of community engagement projects. He won the Poets and Writers Maureen Egan Writers Exchange Contest for the state of Kansas. He received a Rocket Grant for the community project Vox Narro. He is a founding member of the Latino Writers Collective and sits on the boards of UMKC Friends of the Library and is president of the board of the Writers Place. And without further ado, José Faus.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be presenting today. I will only make one correction on the bio, is that I'm no longer on the board of the Writers Place. I'm now on the board of Charlotte Street Foundation, but that's on me because I work with artists and I always tell them, make sure that you control your narrative. And I, of course, forgot to check my bios that are online. So that's on me. I'm very pleased to be here. It's kind of an odd thing to be doing, actually, because I actually work for KU. I am a part of my performing thing. When you're an artist, you find a lot of different kinds of gigs. And one that somebody introduced me to a few years ago is working as a standardized patient at the Niles Clinic there at KU. So that's been an incredible experience. Medicine from another perspective instead of the recipient, actually being part of helping new doctors come into the world. There is one role that I do there that is kind of interesting. It's Pablo Rios. So in the Pablo Rios role, I am basically a man who does not speak English, who presents at a clinic, maybe like JDoc, and has brought somebody along with him who's going to interpret, and then he's going to talk about his malady. The doctors are going to try and assess and kind of judge that whole experience of working through an intermediary to get at health. The funny thing about this role is that when I started doing that, I was 55 years old, and the role called for somebody that was 65. And he has a persistent cough that doesn't go away. The funny thing about it is that 10 years later, now I fit the age of the role because I'm now 65, and the damn cold hasn't gone away. I'm still coughing away. So some days you guys are going to figure it out. That's the nature of the gig. I'm going to start this presentation. I'm a poet as well, a writer. And I want to start with a poem that is kind of the theme of what I'm going to be talking about today, but I'm going to read it in Spanish and then in English, and I'll explain the rationale. The poem is called En un rincón. En la mañana pidió mi nombre. Le di 6 y en la tarde me dejó con 3. Cada noche me sentí parte de algo nuevo pero extraño de mi vida. En los días que siguieron, semanas, meses y años, viví aparte. No probé la pulpa de la guanábana, la avena ni el perico con las cebollas y tomates que crecían en el jardín al lado de la casa de mi abuelita, ni la leche que llegaba cada día fresca con una capa de nata. Después de 40 años, me encontré en un rincón, sentado en la silla más cerca de la calle, en una mesa alumbrada por la llama de una vela. Acostumbrado al peligro de las memorias, oí, pero no creí cuando me dijo, este es el sabor de tu tierra. Ordené el perico con tomate y cebolla, la yuca frita y la morcilla, un jugo de guanábana y un vaso de avena. En esa noche interminable, comí y conocí todo que 40 años habían negado. Cuando pagué la cuenta, él pidió mi nombre. Le di 6 nombres firmes, un abrazo fuerte y lágrimas con mi propina. In English, this is the poem. And it's based on an incident that happened to me in the corner. In the morning, he asked my name. I gave him 6. In the afternoon, he left me with 3. By nightfall, I felt part of something new, but a stranger to my life. In the following days, weeks, months, and years, I lived apart. I did not once taste the pulp of the guanábana or the avena, or the scramble with onions and tomatoes that grew in the garden by the side of grandmother's house, nor the milk that arrived fresh each morning with a thick cap of cream. After 40 years, I found myself in a corner, seated in the chair closest to the street, at a table illuminated by the flame of a lone candle. Accustomed to the treachery of memory, I heard, but did not believe when he told me, "This is the flavor of your motherland." I ordered the scramble with onions and tomatoes, the fried yuca and the blood sausage, the juice of guanábana and a glass of avena. In that indeterminable night, I ate and remembered what 40 years had negated. When I paid my bill, he asked my name. I gave him 6 firm ones, a strong hug, and a tip full of tears. And what this poem relates and addresses is what happens to immigrants often, especially if we're young and we have no say in the matter. My mother had left my brother and I with my grandmother for about 3 years while she came up here and settled, tried to find her way. My sister came with her. So when we came to this country, I can remember, being told, you're going to go see your mother and you're going to go to the United States. And I just took it like one of these trips that we would take with my grandmother when we would go visit our aunt's house, right? They lived in Medellin, they lived in Barranquilla or Bucaramanga. So these were places that or even Puerto Wilches, which was the ancestral family home. So we would visit these places. And so too, when she said, we're going to go see your mother, it felt like the same kind of outing, right? We'll go for a while and then come back. And the other thing to remember too, at that point, my mother had been gone so long that I didn't really have that fixation. Oh, I'm so excited I'm going to see mother. I just didn't have that sentiment. I don't recall it. So it really felt like just a trip and we're coming back. Little did we know that when we arrived, we would never come back. And I think that's the first clue that you get as an immigrant when you're young, that you have really no say in something. And the things that you do after that realization are the things that in so many ways define who you are and who you become. I will say that after I realized that we weren't going back, there was an incredible nostalgia, a fear, a sadness that was indescribable. And I think to this day lingers. We often hear immigrants will say things like, I feel, especially first generation immigrants, I feel like I live in 2 realities. I have one foot in one world and one foot in another. And what that tangibly means to me is that I am very aware of who I was at 9 years old. I'm very aware of the sounds that made up my soundscape. I'm very aware of the foods that made up my foodscape. I'm very aware of the streets and the hills that I lived in, the colors, the smells, the senses. Those things are very powerful in me. But yet, time has kind of made me doubt some of them, right? Because biases and desires can kind of influence sometimes exaggerate what you're feeling and what you're sensing. So there's always this long sense of regret, a long sense of longing for something that time kind of begins to change, right? And then there's the second part of that, which is adapting to the place you come into. The very first lesson I learned about coming to this country takes place in another poem that I'm going to read. I'm only going to read you two poems, so if you're not into poetry, don't worry. I'm not going to kill you with more poetry. But I do want to share this poem with you. And I will warn you, the N-word is in this poem. I tend to get very dark in summer. And but this is a poem that reflects that. We landed in Miami Beach, September 29, 1964. I mean, December 29, 1964. And my stepfather decided he was going to drive us home from Miami. And this is that trip. I remember Jackson, Mississippi. I know there are things I know I am meant to know. It is a long trip by car through the South of 1965. We are in a 1956 Chevy, my brother and I in the back, he and her in the front. And he is telling us something. She nods her teary eyes, but he is telling me the gospel truth. There are people in this place that will see and not like the color of your skin. And I remember clear as night the sign Jackson that he points out and teaches me to say, Jackson, Jackson, one of my first words in English. I remember when I used to date her blonde hair and gray eyes. I would visit up north outside St. Joe and lounge in the yard of her sister's house in the burning afternoon sun. The end of summer, we broke up. Later, she told me how relieved her sister's in-laws were to not have to drive by the house and see the nigger on the lawn. I had a friend when we lived in the suburbs. He hated the lawn ornaments that dotted his neighbors' yards, the black jockeys holding reins in their hands. When I stayed the night, we would get high, and out into the night we would run, smashing the sculptures with our bats, a fungal to the head as good as any swing on cowhide. Some of the houses would replace them with other jockeys, but through the years we saw them disappear, replaced by gnomes and toads and deer. I think of that trip and know what I was meant to know. 3 months after the bodies had been found, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwimmer in Neshoba County, Mississippi. It is 45 years since I learned Jackson and why he made me repeat it until it flowed like venom from my tongue. And I understand why she cried and why I got such joy smacking the heads off the lawn jockeys and watching them roll, tumble, and bounce lacy across the lawns. To me, the two things that happened that are emblematic, I think, for a lot of immigrants in the experience is the very first thing that happened. In the poem, I relate the opening line. I introduced myself. I had 6 in the morning, and by afternoon, I had 3. And what happened in that immigration office was that I presented my passport. In it, there were 4 names: José Enrique Faus Cardona. Unspoken were the other names: José Enrique Faus Cardona Lopez Sanchez Espinosa. Good to meet you. When we left the immigration office later that evening, I was Joseph Henry Faus. I don't know what the discussion was. I don't know anything, but every formal paper after that was Joseph Henry Faus, except for Social Security, which maintained the other name that was on my passport. So I was Joseph Henry Faus Cardona. And I struggled with that because I always knew my name was Jose. I responded to Jose. And when I first got matriculated or enrolled in school, it was the school up here on 33rd. It was actually down on the west side because we moved to the west side first. And it was down, I think it was Sacred Heart or Holy Cross. I can't remember the church exactly. But I remember that very first day of class, I wasn't even Joseph. The teacher said, "Oh, we'll call you Joe." You know, I mean, that was translated to me, but I became Joe, which, you know, for me, it was yo, me, myself, I, right? That's what it means in Spanish. But no, it's Joe. And I can recall not having a say on anything. I mean, I was taught to respond to Joe. So that's one of the things that in that poem I talk about. The experience years later is when I find myself in a Colombian restaurant. And I remember going in and I was shocked that it was a Colombian restaurant. It's actually across the river, not far from the studio I maintain over in Kansas City, Kansas. And I saw this place and it said El Rincón, and it was Colombian food. I almost had a heart attack. I pulled over and said, I got to eat here. There are other Colombian restaurants through the years. There have been maybe two, but they're no longer around. But I remember walking into El Rincón and I asked the guy in Spanish, really Colombian food? And he says, oh my God, yes, this is your homeland. This is your country, your motherland. Yes, it's totally that. And I remember ordering, sorry a minute, but I felt and tasted the things that 40 years had denied me. The food, oh my God. I hadn't had fried yuca for many years. My mother was not a great cook. She actually was working too many jobs to really make our foods. She actually taught me how to make arroz con pollo. At 12 years old, I'm cooking arroz con pollo for my brothers and sister. She taught me how not to burn an egg. I mean, you know, because she knew she wasn't going to be around to do it. But she never taught me the other foods. And so I had not had some of them for years. Avena is an oatmeal drink that you make with cinnamon. It's just delicious as heck. And here it was Avena there. And I remember ordering this food, and I just ordered more than I could eat, and I ate it all. It was not going to taste better rewarmed, right? But that experience was so unreal to me, because in that moment, in that little corner of that restaurant by myself, I'm reliving things that memory had clouded for many years. The perico is a simple dish. I mean, you have versions of it, you know, it's tomatoes and onions over eggs. You get it a la mexicana without green peppers. We add a lot of green peppers, so you can get it a la mexicana, it's the style in Mexican. But we call it perico. And I remember that perico, that scramble, tasted so damn good because I was surrounded by all these memories that all of a sudden were filling me. The nostalgia that comes with thinking back on a place that you no longer have an attachment to, that you've lost an attachment to for many years. I've never gone back to Colombia, which is a sad admission to make on my part. I've been to South America, I've been to Argentina, I've been to Bolivia, Ecuador, Mexico many times, Peru once. But there's something that has kept me from going back to my home country. And perhaps it's the knowledge and the fact that over the years, many of my relatives that would have been there, my aunts have passed away. They were much older. They're sadly gone. There's only one aunt that's still around. She lives in a place called Cali in Colombia, which I'm going to make my final pilgrimage there, hopefully this next year. But other than that, most of the family that I had attachments to have moved on. They're no longer, if I have attachments to them, it's because they're cousins or the children of cousins that I knew probably back then. So it's a very fractured memory that way. But I have a strong alliance to it still. It pulls me in ways that I'm surprised by. As I had a moment when I was reading that poem. I've read that poem so many times, I did not think I would get emotional reading it to you. So that's how that first poem relates. The second poem is the idea that I'm a brown person in a family that looked like a rainbow to me now in retrospect. My uncle Rafa was a very dark black man. He was from Venezuela. My cousin Rafael, my cousin's son, my uncle's son, he was very dark. My cousins Patricia and Lenore, white, gray, almond eyes. I did not know color in the way that we see color here until that moment. And I remember being so confused by this idea of that people would judge me by that. Because I never felt that in my life I had been judged by that. I felt like I was part of a family and that's what we were. We never saw this idea of color. So that was a very shocking realization, one that to me is still the hardest thing for me to grasp. And that is not to say, honestly, because this is a universal conflict. That is not to say that everything is great and clear in Colombia and that we have this incredible racial harmony that exists, because, you know, in my studies and in visiting other countries, I've come to realize that race is this ubiquitous thing that just somehow seems to exist and works against building the kind of community that we should be living in. It doesn't allow for certain things. And it's insidious in the way it comes about. And I'll relate to you what I think to me is one of the saddest aspects of it. I don't know how we become indoctrinated into it, but as an immigrant, I was very aware of how it was happening. I just related this story to some students this morning. A friend of mine was adjudicated to house detention, 16 years old. His mother was having a little hard time keeping him at home. She was afraid he was going to go and do something, had an ankle bracelet. So she decided she was going to take him down to the Ozarks. And she called me up and said, Greg won't go unless you go with him, you know. So I've never been to the Ozarks. So we took a trip down to the Ozarks. We stopped, I remember the place, Grabwa, there's a dam about Grabwa Mill or something like that. Back in that day, there was a diner that set off the road there. And I remember we were hungry after the drive and we said, okay, let's eat in this cafe. And I remember walking into that cafe and Greg is white, right? The place we walked to was totally white. I am a brown person walking in, summer, I am very dark. And there's that scene in Star Wars, I always refer to it because I so laughed when this scene happened in Star Wars where they walk into that bar and it's full of all these aliens and they all look really creepy and scary. But the minute the guy from Earth walks in, they all look at him and they stop eating, right? It's like, whoa, a foreigner in here. And that was exactly the way I felt because people literally stopped eating to look. And there was this uncomfortable gasp and uncomfortable moment, gap of silence. And it didn't take me long to realize I was the subject of that. We call them, I guess, microaggressions now or anything like that. But I remember just kind of reinforcing this sense of how does one get to that point that looking at somebody else is enough to keep them from seeing their humanity or to be shocked by that, to feel that there's an other in the present. Well, I understand fully how that happened, honestly. I recall another incident many years later. I'm sitting up on 41st and Main. It's kind of a beautiful day. I've got to meet somebody, but I'm a little early. It's down there by where the Starbucks is now, but it wasn't one back then. So I stop just shy of the corner while I wait until it gets to be time so I don't arrive too early. And I have my music on, I've got the windows on, and I'm just chilling. I'm just waiting till the time comes. I've got about 20 minutes. And it's right about the time when a school bus stops and drops off some kids. And it's a bunch of elementary school kids that are dropped off there. And there's a combination of black and white kids walking. And there's a trio of them, one white kid, and then two black kids, what I assume is a brother and sister. They're walking along. And the white kid picks up a rock and he throws it at the bus. And he's yelling at the bus driver, who is white, nigger. He's yelling the word to them. And all the kids are laughing. At that age, I don't think they know how loaded that word is. I know they don't know. The kid throwing the rock and his friends walking along with him. But I know that word. And I'm looking at the bus driver and I'm looking at that situation and it dawns me just how irrational this whole moment is. And it's one of those moments that is indelible in my mind. I can never shake it from me. Because I try to understand nothing in our DNA tells us to hate. Nothing in our DNA tells us to make these judgments based on these exterior surfaces. You know, we're not those animals living where camouflage is so important in order to keep predators at bay. We are the predator. We are the dominant one. So how can we look across each other and see a difference that signifies threat, that identifies the other as an enemy? And I think it's our environment creates it for us. Our fears as adults get translated to our children, and it gets translated and translated and translated, almost like a trait that we pass on automatically. And it's a difficult thing to overcome. But that's how those two poems relate to that. And to this day, it's something I struggle with a lot. I don't think that struggle will ever end. So the idea of living in two places at once, and then with the idea of even if you try to adapt to the one place, it's difficult to always be aware of that distinction. But also realizing that that the nostalgia you have for the first place colors the way you see it. And I'll show you a piece of that nostalgia. I'm going to stand up and I hope you can see the whole thing. This is a quilt. My brother and I each got one. It's what I've been told years later that it's a log cabin print of a type. And it's full with all these little pieces of material and fabric. Why it's significant to me? It's the only thing I have from my childhood in Colombia, apart from some photos, black and white, that my grandmother, that my aunt sends me, or my mother finds, or my uncles and aunts. Hey, look at this picture. It's all in black and white. The other thing is the only thing I have tangibly from that time that exists, and it's colorful, and it was given to me by my grandmother. I have my passport that my brother and I came into this country with. I have a copy of a birth certificate issued by that, and a couple of other legal papers, but that's all I have. And this is the one thing that has a direct connection. Somewhere in this cloth, somewhere many years before, it was exposed to the smells that flowed out of my grandmother's kitchen or my aunt's kitchen. Somewhere in here, I like to think that those flavors, those smells still exist, right? It's what memory allows me to imagine. I also like to think that these colors right here are the colors I paint with, that somehow this was ingrained in me from such an early age, that it's my palette. And in this palette, there's no color that doesn't belong, right? Every one of these colors is my palette, which contributes to my idea of being a writer. I also like to think that in this blanket are found those moments of comfort, because this blanket covers. Now, it doesn't have any batting in the back, right? It's just, this is falling apart. I've had it for so long, and I've been careless with it sometimes. But I've come to realize just how important this is because of something that happened, I think, about 2 years ago. I was asked to make a presentation similar to this. And I wanted to touch on this idea of memory and the things that we carry or the things we leave behind. There was a book that was written about that, the things that they carried about the Vietnam War and the soldiers that went there and the things they carried and are found after they're dead. And I thought about my mother's blanket. It has been with me all these many years. I don't think it was my baby blanket anymore. It would have been too big, but it's something that she gave me when we left. And I remember I thought, oh, this would make a perfect prop to talk about these things. And I went looking for the blanket. Like I say, it's always been with me, but I've been careless about how it's been with me. I've moved so many times in the city. I calculated one time that I've lived, I think, in about 35 different places or more in the years that I've lived in Kansas City. I'm very peripatetic, not by intent, it's just circumstance. But I've managed to live within 1 block of the state line many times, which is a strange thing about the state line. But anyways, I went looking for this blanket and I couldn't find it. I started to panic, not because I wanted to use it at first because I wanted to use it for the presentation, but secondly, I began to realize just how important this blanket had become to me. I was not really aware, like I said, I've been careless about its import in my life. But I began to think this is the only thing I have tangibly of that time, and especially of my grandmother, who came to visit just once when I was 12 and had already become too Americanized to respect my elders. And she died sadly not long after. I never saw her again, or saw her again to apologize for the behavior of her little cuckoo, who all of a sudden was not the well-behaved boy she had known when I left for the States. I was now a teenager with opinions and demands and anger. So this means a lot to me. And the fact that I couldn't find it sent me into a panic. I remember one time I cried. You know, it's like, damn, man, how could I lose this one thing? And I searched and searched. I searched my mind. I even called old friends. Hey, did I leave it at your house? I even called old girlfriends. Hey, did I leave it in your house? That's a very embarrassing thing to do. Trust me. But then I remembered something triggered a memory. I don't know why. That somebody had given me an electric blanket, and I thought I hate electric blankets, but I took the gift, but it came in this nice big old plastic bag, and oh, that's a perfect place to put my blanket. And boy, that immediately triggered. And then it was just a matter of remembering whose basement had I left it in, and I did. I found it. But I remember opening that thing, and all that nostalgia rushing back to me in ways that I was not prepared for. And I think that to me signifies how important mementos become in a life, right? There's just no memory, and there's absolutely nothing I can do that I will ever replace what this has come to mean to me, because it means all the things that I have told you. If I'm a painter, it's because the colors are in this thing. If I wax poetic about things, it's because the poetry existed in this blanket. It is a tangible connection to things that I may never experience again. I know it has nothing to do with family or anything like that. It just has to do with what was. I tell people that to be an immigrant when you're young is to go through this idea of arrested development. And that is exactly what I believe happened to me. And I think that's why it's really important to share these kinds of stories so that we get to understand that I don't think anybody really has a great experience that is transformative in a positive way at the very beginning. It takes time. It takes working through many things to get to that point of acceptance. But there's always going to be a profound nostalgia that makes you for me, it's become a comforting thing. I have no problem living in two worlds because it gives me one great option. When I travel and leave Kansas City and go somewhere else, I'm never in any hurry to get back. I'm never one of those people that goes on a trip and says, oh my God, how I wish I was back home. No, never. It never happens to me. By the same token, I'm not depressed when I'm back, right? I'm not sitting there go, oh God, how I wish I could be where I was just a week ago. No, I don't have those kinds of sentiments. I live for that moment in which the reality presents itself to me. And so I can have the memories of the other places I've been, but I don't begrudge where I'm at, right? I look, and I'm not one of those people that sits there, okay, I'm planning a trip for next year and I can't wait. And I sit there and no, I can wait, I will sit there and wait and then think about it when it's time to go. Do I have the passport? That's the only thing I really worry about. Do I have the passport? And then when the time comes, yeah, I'm usually always late for the airport. I'm lucky if I've never missed the plane, but I really push the limit. Something in my mind just doesn't allow me to live in a lot of ways beyond the reality I'm experiencing in the moment. And I think that's probably a way that I deal with living in two worlds at the same time. They have their moments, right? I do want to open up this idea to any questions you may have, because you probably can tell I can talk about anything forever. And if you invite me, I usually will do that, But I do want to answer any questions you may have that kind of align with this relationship. The one thing I will add is that for me, I think it's very important to share these kinds of experiences, to relate these kinds of narratives, because I think that is the only way that we can really begin to understand the commonalities that we share. We always hear about the immigrant experience in the States and how it shaped what this country is. But often I think people forget their own immigration stories, There are very few people that are here by their own will. They usually left because of other reasons, other circumstances. And not all of us are immigrants, right? Some of us were here, some of us were brought in chains. So it's hard to say that that's their immigrant experience. That's something that people have to deal through themselves and figure out how they come to terms with that. But yeah, it's important to know that, a lot of people say we're all immigrants or we all have some kind of immigrant experience or some experience of coming from somewhere else. But we never really ask, what does that mean? What does it mean to a German a person of German descent who came here running from whatever religious thing might have been in their narrative and end up in, Herman, Missouri, in German country, right? In the hills down there. What does that mean? What commonalities are there in the experience that we can share, right? I wrote a poem, but it's so long I won't even bother to read it. But a friend of mine asked me one time, he's a sculptor, and he says, I want to create a sculpture about my Belgian heritage. And I thought, Belgian, it's like, okay. And he asked me, he says, I want you to write something around that. And I said, okay, you know what we'll do? Let's talk to each other. Let's have a conversation. And we met, we talked for like about 3 hours. I asked him questions. I probed a lot of things about him. And I found so much in his story so similar to mine, right? The reasons for coming here, the way that you adapt to a land that's foreign to the one you came from, the things that you bring. I think about somebody that comes from a country, right? They're farmers. What is the only thing they bring with them that has any meaning? A little piece of the soil they grew up in, they farmed and tilled in a jar, in a bottle or something. And when they find that place where they can call home, dump that soil in there as if to make the connection. To me, that's an incredibly beautiful experience, and one that transcends any kind of racial component or history, right? And it's those little stories that I find in so many narratives that we don't share with each other. And perhaps if we started to share them, we could then find a commonality that will allow us to deal with some of the things that keeps us apart. So that's kind of my narrative for you. I know exactly where this thing is. I think it's happening. doctor that came to visit you in your house, right? So I was in Bolivia. I got sick. The hotel I was staying at called the doctor. The doctor came, brought his little brown bag. I was shocked. I thought those were in a museum somewhere. But he brought his little brown bag. He diagnosed me, gave me a prescription. I went down to the pharmacy just down the street, picked up the prescription, cost very little. The doctor visit was less than, it was embarrassing low. It was like $15. And I think we just have these expectations that what we left is going to be even better when we get here, because this is the richest country in the world. And in fact, sometimes the bureaucracy of things gets in the way. And that's a level of care that we don't think about how that translates. The other thing is too that, and this is something that happened in one of the sessions we were doing, one of the doctors in training had said something about, well, you know, he may be suffering from tuberculosis. And for an old generation, an older person, to hear a diagnosis of tuberculosis is almost as bad as cancer, is death, right? Because this is the thing that they grew up with. Tuberculosis is almost non-existent here in some ways, right? So they were, you know, in my play acting, I reacted, oh, tuberculosis, wow, you know, it's like, you know. So it's just, I think, the way that we view care and the things that seem more important to us are very distinct things. And I don't know how one trains somebody on that, but definitely realize that the standard of cares can be very different depending on where you come from. And trust too. Some people do not want to share with people they don't know. And that's very difficult, right?
I am Luisa, and I was born in Bogota, Colombia.
Ah, paisano.
Paisano. Yes, that's right. And I moved here when I was 13 years old, and so it was, you know, the height of being a teenager. It was quite a transition for me, and I've often struggled with the thought of not, now that I've been here half my life, not being American enough, but also not being Colombian enough, especially when I go back to Colombia, and not being able to fully relate to Americans, but also not being unable to fully relate to Colombians. And so since you have somewhat of a similar experience, I was wondering what helps you to cope with those feelings of, for me at least, is somewhat of a being uncomfortable sometimes, of inadequacy, of not being, you know, being not enough or too much of any one thing. And
Yeah.
what helps you, whether it is something in writing or movies, music, or activities, whatever the case may be, what helps you cope with those feelings?
I always go to poetry for one. So that's my universal remedy. I can read the poetry of my country. I can read the poetry from other countries. I have that language, right, that I can still speak, that I can still read. So that's a very big comfort for me. The other one is one that I tell students I work with, or anybody, don't look at your deficit as an obstacle, look at it as a superpower. So I've come to be very comfortable, but I won't tell you it was easy, with living in two worlds at the same time. I don't mind, what is that one saying? I don't want to be part of a club that would have me as a member. So in some ways, the fact that I'm never Colombian enough for some people, or that I'm never you know, American enough for other people, that seems to me like a badge of honor, right? There was that great story about the man without a country, right? I kind of feel like that's okay. If I don't have a country, if I'm not accepted by anybody, then that means the whole world is my oyster. The whole world belongs to me. And I love that idea. I think I've come to see that as a really strong thing. But I will admit to you, it hurts when people question your authenticity. And it's a difficult thing to you know, kind of come to terms with. It's not an easy thing. But I do think that what has helped me a lot is the fact that I do have the language, and that I can go in and read in the words, at least be close enough to that. And I will tell you, the best thing for me that ever happened was I got on a plane to go to, the first time I went to South America, I was going to Argentina. The plane came from Canada, it flew over the ocean, and then it crossed into Peru, right at the Pacific. And I had just happened to wake up right as we were crossing into Peru. And I remember having this very distinct impression. I saw the topography and I saw the houses that align. Lima sits very close to the ocean, and the style of architecture is very similar to what I grew up with. And I immediately saw these houses and I said, oh my God, from the air, that looks exactly like my grandmother's house with the, you know, enclosed central area. In the
Mm-hmm.
And I felt, in that moment, I smelled the smells, I heard the language, I heard the music. I cried like a baby, I'll tell you that. Grabbed my little pillow and just put it there so nobody could see. But at least I realized at that point, no matter what anybody tells me, I'm Colombian. And that's never gonna go away.
Yes.
That's enough to satisfy me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. That never goes away, you know. I remember coming back one time, I was at the airport, it was during the World Cup, and there was a security guard, and he asked me, in we speak in Spanish, he was Cubano, so I said, yeah, from Colombia. And I think Colombia was getting ready to play the US in a match. And he says, you're rooting for the US, aren't you? I said, oh no, I'm rooting for Colombia.
Same here, same here.
You know, I can root for I like the US national team. They have a good national team. But man, if they're playing Colombia, I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I mean, damn it. You know?
Agreed.
That's not going to change. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Miroslava. I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
I'm from Mexico, and when you were giving your when you were telling us your story, you mentioned that for you it was really surprising how here color, like your how people see your color, it's like a big thing here. And in Mexico, it's not. Like I was really surprised to hear you that, because I feel like to hear you saying that, because I feel like sometimes people don't say that. And as now getting you old, do you see, like, is it still conflicting to you? Like not understanding why it's such a big deal here, how color can put you in a category, or like, oh, because how you look, when like in Mexico there's every color, and so it's just confusing to me. Do you see it different? Is it still the same?
I see, sadly, I see a going back, a regression back to something, especially under the last administration, but leading up to it. Even when Obama was elected, I was one of those people. I saw Jesse Jackson waving his little flag when Obama was elected. And I saw the tears in his eyes, and there were tears in mine, because I honestly did not think I would see it in my lifetime. And so I could relate to that experience. But in the last few years, it seems like we've retrenched back, and the lines have been drawn in a way where it really is a struggle sometimes to believe that it's possible. But I believe, I mean, that's the only reason I'm talking to you, really, because I think any opportunity to explore that. But there is, I did say that it's different in other countries, but there is one thing that still persists even in Mexico. And that is that if you look at the personalities that tend to dominate the media, there's still that face that's very European looking. Though Mexico probably, I think, had the first Black president in this hemisphere. People don't think about that back in the 1800s. Mexico opened up its borders to slaves to come down there. The Negro Leagues, players before the Negro Leagues established and and led to the big formation of the leagues, a lot of players played down in Mexico, down in Venezuela. Why do you think that Santo Domingo and those places are so in love with Mexico? They were getting Black players to play down there because they weren't allowed to play up here in the big leagues, right? So for me, I still do believe that it's possible, but I think it's like, we're all given freedom. We all have this one thing we share in common. We're free. But then you realize it's something you have to keep fighting for day in and day out, year after year, generation after generation. And so Miroslava, that's not going to change. But I have a great hope that we just keep trying, you know. We keep building the community we want to live in. And I want to live in one that is very diverse, very open, and isn't judging me by where I come from.
Yeah, I agree. I was just, for me, when I came here, it's only been like 4 years. So still a new concept to grasp the idea of it. And I do agree, like in Mexico, there's the media is not as diverse, but I feel like on a lower level, not think about media, social media, or like any type of media. It's more like we realize there's no much difference, and I was still the same. So it's just kind of hard to grasp the concept here. So thank you.
I'll tell you a really quick story that illuminates a lot of things for me, how we perceive people from other countries. I made a presentation at a school over in KCK. There was a little girl that had just arrived from Mexico, probably 4 months in there. She was there, hardly spoke English, so I needed somebody to move the slides for me because it wasn't working. So I asked her, she sat next to me, she pushed the slides forward. And then at the end of the conversation, she was still there. So we started talking in Spanish, and I asked her, well, I was curious, how do you feel being in this country? I was thinking about my own experience. And she said something that was so profound. She said, you know, I know we're supposed to like this country and it's supposed to be great because it is America, it's the US, it's the greatest country in the world. But she said, I didn't realize we were poor until we came here. When I lived, and she lived in Guanajuato. If you've ever been to Guanajuato, it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, bar none. It's just an incredible city.
Yes.
And yes, you know it, right? And it's beautiful. And remember she said to me, she says, yeah, maybe we didn't have the things everybody else had, but every day after my father got off work, we would go to the park and we would eat out in the open, you know? And it was those experiences she had with family and friends and location that enrich our lives, right? So how can you be poor when you have that kind of thing? But I think we tend to think that people in other countries are so disadvantaged that they should be grateful when they come here. You know, we have this idea that, oh, small business, we celebrate small business, right? As one of the major tenets of capitalism in the US economy. Name me a country where a small business has not existed. Go back to ancient times, go to Etruscan times, go to, you know, Sumerian times. There was a guy on the corner of the street down wherever the hovels were who was really good at fixing the ropes that went around the horses, and everybody took their business to him. That's a small businessman, right? And that has existed throughout history. But somehow we've only discovered it here in this country. I think that's kind of the ethnocentrism that keeps formulating or fostering these kinds of divisions that we don't need to have. They don't exist really. So.
Thank you.
Jose, I'm Kimberly Conley. I'm the Senior International Officer and the Director of the Office of International Programs. And I've worked with immigrants and international students my entire professional career. I just want to thank you for your story. I think storytelling is so important and humanizing experiences so that, like you said, we can connect with each other and our humanity. So it's really beautiful. It's beautiful to listen to your voice and hear your stories. I really appreciate your last point, especially. I lived in the Federated States of Micronesia on the tiny island of Ponape for 3 years. And there, most of the children run around without shoes and clothes. And there's such a freedom of lifestyle. Where I lived, we didn't have a refrigerator or freezer. And the one thing that was always on the shelf was salt, but like no food, maybe some rice, you know? And every day people went out and fished and brought in food that would be shared and eaten. I think from the outside, a lot of Americans through that ethnocentric view would say, oh, they're so poor, you know, but in reality, very rich and very free. And when Ponapeans come to Kansas City, they often say, it costs to go to the bathroom here. Everything costs. And there you just, go behind a bush and grab some leaves. And there was just such a beauty in the simplicity. I learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you for bringing up so many poignant points for us today.
You said something that resonates with me so hard. I like to walk barefoot because that's what I remember most in Colombia, right? We never felt like we had shoes. We were kids. And so out here, I walk barefoot. Even when I go out into the street in front of the house, I remember one girlfriend of mine said, "Don't you come inside the house with your bare feet. You got to clean them before you come in." I was like, "What?" It was like, "Hi, Warren, we're not together anymore, so that's okay." But yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Jose. That was just fantastic. And I think we all can really take a lot away from what you shared with us today. And now I believe Ryan is ready for our book giveaway.
So this month for Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, we are giving away copies of El Norte by Carrie Gibson, who will be doing the fireside chat with us this Thursday. And this is literally the best part ever because I get to spin the wheel of names, which is so fun. Can everyone see the wheel okay? All right, so let's spin the wheel. We're giving away 5 books today, so I'm excited. Jennifer Jones is a winner. Good job. 4 more. And we'll be giving away these at every event during Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. Kimberly. 3 more big winners today. Antoinette. 2 more. Who will they be? This is so fun. Miroslava. And our last winner, fingers crossed.
Jason said the wheel is rigged.
How is the wheel rigged? It's Letty.
Well, we can spin again. Letty already has a copy.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
that's true. I already have one. Thank you, though.
Okay. One more bonus spin. Aaron. All right. Those are our winners for today. We will be giving out more at every program, including the one with Carrie this Thursday at 2 o'clock. So tune in then to actually hear her talk about the book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jose. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.